Welcome in to Daily Faceoff Live, your go-to source for everything hockey. Live every weekday at noon Eastern.
Welcome in. It is a Tuesday, November 29th edition of Daily Faceoff Live. I'm Tyler Yaremchuk, and alongside me is our president of hockey content here at Daily Faceoff, Frank Saravalli. Frank, how's it going?
Pretty good, Tyler. Great night of hockey and ready to break it all down.
Yeah, and there is a lot to break down. We got a little bit of breaking news. We also have Stephen Ellis with the next wave coming up later on in the show. But let's throw 2 minutes and 30 seconds up on the clock and start with one of the results we got last night, and that was the Rangers, who, despite getting off to an early 2-0 lead, lost to the New Jersey Devils. And one player in particular was hard on himself after the game, and it was their goalie, Igor Shesterkin. As you can see here, he allows 4 goals on 37 shots, and he said after the game, quote, "Goalie played expletive game again. I feel so bad and play so bad. I'm ashamed. Every goal is an easy play for me. I have to stop those. If our team wants to win the game, I have to play better." The thing is, yeah, that's probably true. Igor Shesterkin, if you just look at last night's game, you know, he probably could have had most of those goals. On the season as a whole, though, Igor Shesterkin has been the reason they win a lot of hockey games. He has a .258 goals against average, a .913 save percentage, but he's allowed 8 goals against in his last 2 starts. Frank, what do you make of Shesterkin's comments and the Rangers dropping another game?
Certainly raises an eyebrow, and I think when you take a look at Shesterkin and how this season has unfolded for him, he's someone that's reached a crisis of confidence. The key words for me there when I hear them are, "I'm ashamed." And when you read Larry Brooks in the New York Post, and when you look at how this team has played to this point, a goaltender can paper over a lot of the ills that you have as a team. But with a team as fragile as New York has been this season, and Shesterkin being as unsteady as he's been at times, a .913 save percentage, we knew last season that this team analytically and under the hood allowed way too many high danger chances and shots against. And in this case, that's carried over. The Rangers knew that they needed to play differently this season. They haven't been able to do so. And Shesterkin hasn't been nearly good enough to cover up for some of those issues. So they're in a spot now where they're going to be in a dogfight to make the playoffs. Can they go on a run to get in? Of course they can. But here's where it gets really interesting for me, Tyler, because I think the longer this goes on for New York, after going to a conference final last season and taking a huge step forward, we've also seen the stall in the development of some of these younger players. Alexis Lafreniere and Capo Caco and Philip Hedl has been maybe the best of those 3. But I think the longer this goes on, everything has to be on the table for the New York Rangers.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point as well. You mentioned that Shesterkin can usually cover up a lot of sort of their shortcomings as a team. He's faced the 5th most high danger chances at 5-on-5, according to Natural Stat Trick, amongst all goalies. I mean, they certainly don't make life easy on Shesterkin, but it is weird when you're so used to him stealing game after game after game, like he did last season en route to a Vezina trophy. Let's talk about, or let's head out west and talk about some breaking news that we got earlier today. The Dallas Stars locking up Roope Hintz, an 8-year deal that carries an $8.45 million cap hit. And what a fascinating story he is when you remember that he was drafted all the way back in 2015. He spends 2 more years after that in Finland. He plays 91 games in the American League before establishing himself as a full-time NHLer. And now the Stars lock up who they believe can be their top-line center for the next decade, pretty much. Frank, what do you think of this extension for Hintz?
I absolutely love it. I think the Ace of Spades is one of the most underrated players in the NHL. And when you take a look at his last 3 years, his body of work, he's basically a point per game player. And as Mike Kelly from Sport Logic pointed out this morning on social media, that sort of puts him in the top 30 to 35 scorers in the league. I think what's really interesting is the breakdown and where this contract ended up, because it's not a coincidence to me that he ends up right in the exact same neighborhood as Miro Heiskanen. This is a ton of money when you compare it to some other contracts in terms of the fact that Texas has no state income tax. So that number is probably closer to a 10.5 or 11 AAV somewhere else in terms of real net dollars. And it fits in perfectly for the Dallas Stars and their salary cap moving forward, knowing that they have these guys right at the top of it. that can lead their team for the next long while. Hintz has speed to burn. He's an absolute pain in the ass to play against, and he's got a competitive drive that I think allows him to continue to get better and better. His game isn't going anywhere. It's not going to be falling off a cliff. And I think what he did last season is very repeatable in terms of year in and year out production. As you saw him take a huge step forward, Jason Robertson is showing that he can do the same thing again for the Dallas Stars. Hintz is such a big part of everything that the Dallas Stars do. And the fact that he's locked up for the next number of years speaks to the transition that they've had in their organization from the Sagan and Ben era, although those guys have played really well this season, to now Hintz and Robertson and Heiskanen taking over for the next long while.
And Jake Ottinger in that mix as well. But I love that point you made. It's a Hintz and Robertson team now up front. But a big part of their success this season has been the bounce backs from Ben and Sagan. They're just looking like a wagon right now.
Yeah, they have. They've been great. Like, they've turned back the clock, and particularly Jamie Benn with how good his November was. But I've seen a lot of reaction, Tyler, on social media to this contract and say, oof, that's an overpay. Just tells me you don't watch the Dallas Stars.
Yeah, I don't think you're paying close enough attention, because Hintz looks like a guy who, as I said in the first part of this, he can be your top line center for the next decade. And his game, there are no shortcomings. This is a guy who's solid in his own end, can kill penalties, contributes on the power play, puts up good even strength numbers. He's a guy who is worth more than $8.45 million, in my opinion, and he should be for the next 8 seasons. And that's how long the Stars have him locked up. Let's head back to the ice and last night's action in the NHL. And it was the Edmonton Oilers for a second straight game pulling off a strong comeback. If you go back to their game against the Rangers on the weekend, they were 20 minutes away from falling below 500 on the season. They scored 4 goals in the third period, come back, beat the Rangers. Last night, they're 4.4 seconds away from losing to the Florida Panthers, and it's Evan Bouchard who ties things up. He now has 3 of the team's last 8 goals after not scoring once through the first 20 games of the season. It was an impressive comeback that was capped off by a Leon Draisaitl overtime winner as well. Frank, do you think this could be a bit of a turning point for an Oilers team that was largely underwhelming through the first quarter of the season?
I think underwhelming is the perfect word to describe how the Oilers have been to this point, because they've had those flashes of brilliance, and then they've had some other games that have been completely listless and lifeless and have been hard to figure out. In this case, I think the biggest positive to take away is to get more contributions like you've gotten from Evan Bouchard. You mentioned 3 goals now in the last 2 games. You need him and some of the other younger players in that age range to step up and do more for this Oiler team. I think when you break down Bouchard's season and you take a look at it and the fact that only 2 of his points of the 9 that he scored to this point have been on the power play, that stands out to me. I know that second unit doesn't always get the most ice time because the first unit chews up so much of it, but what Bouchard is able to bring to the ice and the lineup, that offensive flair, the shot that he has, you need to see more of it on a consistent basis. And I think you need to see him more involved in the play. So the fact that the Oilers have gotten it from Bouchard of late, and you could start to see that confidence pop, particularly in such a big spot with 5 seconds left in the game on Monday night, that was one of those things that could help propel Bouchard. The thing is, will the rest of the Oilers team go with him?
Yeah, depth scoring has always been an issue for the Oilers since Connor McDavid was drafted back in 2015. And one of the more impressive parts of that comeback victory on Saturday was the first 3 goals they scored to even up that game. McDavid and Draisaitl weren't on the ice for either of them. It was the Ryan McLeod, Dylan Holloway line and Evan Bouchard driving all of the offense. And last night, they did end up getting 3 points from Connor McDavid in the victory, but they actually looked good with 97 and 29 off the ice as well. And that's probably the most important building block here. It's also worth noting the Oilers are banged up right now as well. So if they can get contributions, Evander Kane's not going to be back for a while, but Ryan McLeod probably going to be out for the next week plus. Warren Fogle not in the lineup. Kyler Yamamoto still out with an upper body injury. If they can get contributions while those guys are out, life should get even better for this Oilers team and Jay Woodcroft once they start getting a few more regulars in that top 9 back in the lineup.
Yeah, I was going to say too, it's interesting. I was wondering if the first quarter of the season for Bouchard might have saved the Oilers a bit of money on what that next contract looks like. Interesting to this point that I don't believe there's been much negotiation on that front, but maybe the Oilers now, as they start to see Bouchard perk up a little bit, maybe want to get something like that done before he potentially explodes.
Yeah, and that's a great point as well. The talk in Edmonton has always been, why don't you do with Bouchard what you did with Oscar Klefbom so many years ago and lock him up before the big season comes and then enjoy a bargain contract for a few years, see if anything like that breaks throughout the season. Let's stay in Alberta here because last night was the return to Alberta for Matt Tkachuk, and he was booed by the Oilers faithful almost every time he touched the puck. I was in the building last night, and it was fitting that he scored the first goal of the game, and hand of the ear celebration as well. Yeah, we have a clip of it as Tkachuk just
He
three and
never
a half minutes
disappoints.
in. Yeah, he never disappoints. And this rivalry of Tkachuk versus the Oilers was so good for so many years, and it was great to see that it still lived on. But tonight is his big return to Calgary and the Saddle Dome. Just a few months after he was dealt. What do you think the reception is going to be like for Tkachuk when he returns to the Dome after 431 regular season games in a Flames jersey?
My expectation is that it will be a little bit mixed, and more so for the departure and the way that that played out. I think he was such a fan favorite there. They recognized the excellence in his play and all the different elements that he brought to the ice. Um, and you heard Daryl Sutter talk about it on Monday, the idea that, hey, he's going to be cheered. He should be celebrated for how well he played here. And that is all true. But it's also the fact that he made it really clear at the end that he wasn't going to be re-signing there and he didn't want to play in Canada anymore. So that's a pretty distinct line to draw and essentially force the Flames' hand. And it was managed really quite well from that perspective, in that it never really bubbled over publicly until we got closer to a trade going down. But still, I would think that that leaves a little bit of a sour taste in the mouth of Flames fans. And now they're in a spot where I think both of these teams to this point in the season, the Florida Panthers and the Calgary Flames, after such a seismic transaction, probably have mixed reviews on how this has all gone down. The Panthers won the President's Trophy last year. They're scuffling a little bit. The Calgary Flames are still trying to find their footing outside of the playoff picture at this point in time, and what's been a really disappointing start for both Huberdeau and Weegar in their new uniforms after signing massive extensions. Matthew Tkachuk's really the only guy that's delivered as part of this trade to this point in time among all the guys that had career seasons last year in Calgary or Florida, and I'm going to include Johnny Gaudreau in that mix. Tkachuk is on pace for 119 points this season and to match the 40-some goals that he scored last year. So a new career high in points that he's on pace for, and to hit the same goal total. I was saying for the longest time, Matthew Tkachuk, franchise player, people were pushing back against it, but I think that is a fact.
Let's chat a little bit more here about the Florida Panthers. Just quickly to wrap this up, Paul Maurice said early in the year that they want to be better defensively. They're going to establish some new systems, and he said there could be some growing pains with that. He said the first 20 games of the year might be an adjustment period. Okay, we're clear through that first 20 game mark. Is this still just an adjustment period for the Panthers, or would you be sitting there going, no, there's legitimate concerns with this team as they sit with more losses than wins?
I don't have concern, definitely not from an offensive standpoint. That team averaging more than 40 shots per game, and it was really interesting that the Oilers held them south of 30 on Monday night. But from that perspective, I think they haven't necessarily gotten the results. All of their underlying metrics and numbers have been there. Defensively, they've also dealt with some injury. I mean, Aaron Ekblad missed a significant chunk of time. They're asking other players on their team, Josh Mahura, to step up and do things that they're not accustomed to doing in the NHL. And they are still a bit thin on their back end and probably do miss someone like Mackenzie Weegar. So in terms of concern level, I think they're going to find a way to figure it out. I'd imagine their goals for rockets up significantly. And if they can find any sort of modicum of success defensively, then they'll be that much better off.
One player rarely ever makes a game, but they didn't have Barkov last night. And one of my first thoughts after the Oilers tied it up off a face-off late in the game D zone, I was like, man, if Barkov's in the lineup, I wonder if the Panthers don't hold on and win that hockey game last night. Let's switch gears a little bit and get to our friend Stephen Ellis with a new edition of The Next Wave. Always a pleasure to welcome in Stephen Ellis for his weekly hit here on Daily Faceoff Live. It's the next wave delivered by DoorDash, and some news in terms of the prospect rookie world earlier this week. Marco Rossi, after having just 1 point in 16 games, sent down by the Minnesota Wild. Sort of take us through maybe what hasn't been clicking for Rossi this year and if this was the right decision by Minnesota.
So Rossi decimated everybody in the preseason. This looked like a guy who was ready to go, ready to challenge for the Calder Trophy. He was one of my top picks, but it's someone who still feels like he's trying to play catch up. He missed most of the 2020-2021 season due to COVID, where he had it himself and it took him out. So last year he had to play catch up, and I thought the offensive numbers were good. He was playing with some good line mates, but I wanted to see a bit more of what he could do on his own. And I think this year, when he wasn't cracking the team in the top six right away and he was playing the bottom six, that didn't really suit his style. He's a very smart playmaker. He's one of the smartest prospects, I think, in the game right now. So we know he can do some great things. He's going to put up a lot of points in the NHL. This is a guy I'm expecting to get 60, 70 points every single year. So to have a slow start like this, I think this is a good opportunity for him to get his confidence back because, again, he did play so much catch up where he's a year behind a lot of players from that same draft class. And I think that's a tough thing for him, but I'm not too worried about him right now. He's still very young.
Stephen, as we take a look at the calendar, we're just under a month away from Boxing Day and the World Juniors in Halifax. And that means we're just about 10 days away from the start of World Junior Camp for Team Canada. When you take a look at the potential of their roster, what's the latest on a few big names that might be joining Team Canada for the tournament?
It sounds like Canada will have Dylan Guenther and Shane Wright available to them, which is a huge addition to a team that's already got Connor Bedard, Adam Fantilli, and Logan Stankoven at center alone. That's an incredible group. You throw in guys like Owen Beck, Nathan Gauthier. The center depth is incredible. They might get Brant Clark the way things are kind of going on in LA. He wasn't playing a lot. He's down in the AHL right now, or was on the AHL in a conditioning stint. I think he should be available to him. Then you look at a Brendan Ottman, who's having a great year in the OHL, and he and Shane Wright and Brant Clark made one of the best trios I've ever seen at the U16 level, where Brant Clark was setting them both up from the point, and it was unbelievable. The Don Mills Flyers that I think only lost like one game all season long. Then you bring in Owen Zellweger, who was probably one of the biggest threats for the top defenseman trophy in the last tournament in the summer. This group is going to be one of the deepest offensive groups, and then defense, they're going to be contributing a lot of points. I think the biggest question right now is their goaltending, but if we're looking at Benjamin Goudreau, we're looking at Tyler Brennan, I still think those two guys could be starters on most teams in this tournament. So this Canadian team is going to be just absolutely just full of damage.
Yeah, it seems kind of typical of Canadian World Junior teams, right? They're loaded up front. They got some big blue line pieces, and Canadian hockey fans are sitting there going, who's going to play a net for us in the tournament? Seems like it's always the way. I want to talk a little NCAA hockey with you because there's a Canucks prospect that is the talk of NCAA college hockey. Take us through what you got there.
So Ian McDonough was a guy that a lot of reports were saying the Canucks were trying to make him go pro after last season, and it was someone where he probably could have stepped in, but I feel like he'd probably spend more time in the AHL. Now that he's 23, he's the captain of Northeastern. He's looking just fantastic right now. He's one of the top scorers. Last year, he was about a point per game player. This year, he's on pace for closer to 60, which is not uncommon for 23-year-olds in this, but this is someone who plays a heavy game, has got a great shot. His defensive game has taken some nice steps over the last couple of years, and I think for a 7th round pick, this is all you could ask for. But I think this is a guy that might be able to step into the lineup next year, and he might be a really good, energetic, physical third line power forward type guy for this team. And I really like what he brings to the table there. So it'll be interesting to see kind of what the Canucks do next. Of course, when you got seniors, there is the threat that they might sign elsewhere when their rights expire. But given how hard the Canucks pushed to bring him in last year and how good he's been this season, I think he'll be in the Vancouver Canucks uniform next season.
Yeah, no kidding. A 7th round pick who's looking like he's going to be a hell of a lot more than that. Love the insight as always, Steven. The next wave delivered by our friends at DoorDash, where you can use the promo code GameDay25. That gets you 25% off and no delivery fees on your first order of $15 or more when you download the DoorDash app. Chat again next week, Steven. Thanks.
Thanks, guys.
Moving along to our daily face-off inbox question, hashtag AskDFO. Mitch Marner is putting together quite a point streak. It's now up to 17 games, Frank. So the question is, When will this bad boy end?
It is a really good question because Mitch Marner has been all over the place for the Toronto Maple Leafs. And when you look at this season, not just the point streak, but I think it feels like a long time ago. It was only the end of October that we were Toronto Maple Leafs fans were all over Marner for some of the giveaways that he had against specifically the Anaheim Ducks, rolling their eyes, saying same thing over and over again with this group. But Marner has been really good defensively. I think they've got an interesting few spots on their schedule coming up, but I see no reason why Mitch Marner can't get to 20 games and begin to challenge for that record, the franchise record for the Toronto Maple Leafs, and passing some pretty great players along the way.
Marner is at 17. Jason Robertson is at 16. If they can each survive the next 2 games, it'll be Marner versus Robertson, a 19-game point streak against an 18-game point streak on Tuesday, December 5th, when the Leafs roll into Dallas. Wouldn't that be a fascinating storyline?
Be awesome. And both those guys have been ridiculous. Robertson, I think he's knocking on the door of the Hart Trophy just behind Connor McDavid.
Absolutely. And yesterday on the DFO Rundown, you used the headline streaking to describe the start of the season, not just for teams either, Frank. We have had 7 different 10-plus point streaks from players so far this year. It's been remarkable. Speaking of needing to get on a run and get on a streak, let's get to our Pointsbet Daily Bet segment. It was not a great night for me last night. The only one I hit was that Bouchard shot prop, but thankfully it was up at plus 130. So it, maybe a little bit of damage control there, but I'm not going to try to be too positive about it. Let's just turn the page and get into tonight, where I like the Seattle Kraken as road dogs, plus 110. And honestly, I was stunned when I saw this. I thought they would be pretty significant favorites in this hockey game. You can say, oh, well, they're on the road. Yeah, they're 7-1-1 on the road so far this season, and they're taking on an LA Kings team that is 5-3-2 in their last 10. Seattle's been one of the best teams in the entire NHL in the month of November, and I like them to conclude their schedule this month with a victory against the LA Kings. So that is my favorite spot of the night here. I also really like the Elias Pettersson shot prop out in that Vancouver-Washington game. Pettersson has crushed it in 4 straight games, and I like him to do that once again tonight. Also, a quick one, Marty Necas on the shot prop tonight. It's one of my favorite bets. It's set at 2.5, paying just minus 150, but he's had 4 shots in 3 straight games. I like Necas and Pettersson to hit their shot props. And the Seattle Kraken, Frank, can you believe that they're dogs tonight against the LA Kings?
Yeah, that doesn't feel right to me, especially the way they've plowed through the month of November.
Yeah, they have been red hot. As we always do, let's wrap up the show with a little bit of garbage time. Frank, what do you got?
Yeah, Tyler, I wanted to give a little love to the Edmonton Oilers. They had Indigenous Celebration Night on Monday night and wore some incredible uniforms in pregame warm-up to help celebrate that. But it wasn't just what the players wore on the ice. As you see these awesome-looking jerseys, the numbers were what got me. And Lance Cardinal is the one who designed these. I actually had a chance to meet Lance one night at the casino after a little gambling. And it was great to meet an Oiler fan that's so ingrained in the game. And he's a huge part of leading the charge from the Indigenous community in celebration with the Oilers. And it was also in the arena as well. They had Ashley Calling Bull Rabbit, who was the in-arena host. And I just thought a fantastic night. There's some other teams that do this really well. The Vancouver Canucks are one. The Oilers with their land acknowledgement, and I think how genuine it's been, certainly not window dressing. And after all that the Indigenous community has been through, we celebrated Orange Shirt Day in remembrance and recognition earlier this year. That I think it's important to really bring that part of your community, especially with how ingrained it is in Edmonton as a whole, into your fan base. And I think they've done a great job celebrating that community and continuing it to grow it. And I thought Monday night was a great opportunity to recognize that.
Chief Willie Littlechild, who used to play for the University of Alberta Golden Bears, was on hand as well, and he's actually the one who reads the land acknowledgement on the Jumbotron before every Oilers home game. And also another neat thing that they did in the building last night is kind of every second TV timeout, they did a little profile of leaders in the Indigenous communities in a whole bunch of different respects, from professors at the University of Alberta to people who are just in Edmonton and ingrained in the culture. So I agree with you, Frank. They did a tremendous job last night on Indigenous Celebration Night in Edmonton down at Rogers Place. And that's going to be a wrap for today's edition of the show, a Tuesday, November 29th edition of Daily Faceoff Live. Thanks for tuning in. Don't forget, hit that subscribe button, and we'll chat again tomorrow, noon Eastern time.
Thanks for tuning in to Daily Faceoff Live. Make sure you hit the subscribe button to never miss an episode.